Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 212. I'm so excited to introduce you to my friends Cody and April Quillen today. The Quillens attended a While We're Waiting weekend in Arkansas in June and shared the story of their precious daughter Catie with us. They were enjoying a long-awaited family vacation in Mexico when Catie experienced a serious health crisis. Their story includes a harrowing tale of their experience with the healthcare system there, culminating in them having to kidnap their daughter from a Mexican hospital to get her back to the U.S. In the first half of this two-part episode, they share about that experience and Catie's ultimate homegoing. You'll want to come back next week to hear how God has carried them through the past what-ifs by focusing on the future what-ifs. For now, settle in and listen to their riveting tale of rescue. Hi, Cody and April. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're with me this evening. Let's start out by giving you the opportunity to share a little bit about yourself with our listeners. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
We live in Fate, Texas. Cody is originally from California. I'm originally from Louisiana. And we just kind of met in the middle in Texas. But I'm a labor and delivery nurse and work at one of the local hospitals. My time is really busy right now, just keeping up with our other three children and just the general aspects of life, just normal everyday stuff.
Sure. How about you, Cody?
Yeah, originally from California, moved out here to Texas. April and I got married in 99. And see, 4 children. I work as a mechanic for years, and then got out just recently. Kind of got out of that and started went into the sign business, installing signs and things of that nature. Love anything outdoors, working on things. I love golfing and anything athletic.
Yeah, very good. Sounds like you guys keep very busy.
Yes, we do.
We do, very much so.
Well, good. Well, we're here today to talk about your daughter, Catie. So I would love for you to take a few minutes to tell us about her. Help us get to know her a little bit.
Catie was a very unique child. She's very artistic, just love anything with like clay models. I think when she was maybe like 6 years old, she started sewing her own dresses for her dolls. Wow. She was just very crafty. She was a wonderful painter. We have tons of pictures that she had painted in her short time on our just drawing. And she was just a very silly girl. Just, she liked to joke around. She had a very sarcastic sense of humor, just very witty. She would always have a very quick comeback to everything and just make you roll laughing because she could say it so seriously, but come off with that sarcastic, funny attitude. She loved everything Asian. She wanted to go to China one day. And so some of her paintings are just Chinese style art. But she was just an amazing, talented child. She loved Bob Ross, and she always watching Bob Ross, and she collected Bob Ross things. And even at the end, maybe when she was maybe like 11 years old, 10 or 11, she even got to the point where you could hear her in her bedroom when she was painting. She would talk to her paintings and talk about them just like Bob Ross did.
Yeah.
So
she painted happy little trees and things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
That's so fun.
Yes, she has lots of nature paintings.
It was funny because she was very private about her paintings, and we really didn't even know. I mean, she always was asking for art supplies and stuff, and we would get them for her. Well, we moved from a house in Mesquite to this house here in Fate, and we were setting up our second oldest daughter's room, and she had a painting in there. And April and I, we were like, "That's really good. Where'd you get that?" And she was like, "Catie did it."
Wow.
And April and I looked at each other and we were like, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, Catie did that for me." And she's like, "Have you not seen her butterfly painting?" And we're like, "We haven't seen anything." And so I went into her room and I was like, "Let me see some of your paintings." And she was like, "No."
Oh.
And I was like, "Okay, no, this is not a question anymore. I want to see your paintings." And I went in there, and in her closet, I just started pulling out painting after painting after painting, and they were phenomenal. Her butterfly painting, she actually took 4 small canvases and made a butterfly. You had to put them together to actually see the butterfly.
Wow.
It was something else. After that, I was just constantly looking, and you'd see she had sketchbooks just filled with sketches that she did. She did a watercolor of Abraham Lincoln, and that is just incredible. And she was like, she told me she was just practicing her watercoloring.
Wow. And what a treasure to have all of those paintings now.
Oh,
Yes.
it definitely is.
Yeah, that is wonderful.
Yeah, I kept wondering, I'm like, okay, I'm forking out all this money for all of these canvases and I don't know where they're going.
Yeah.
And then Cody found some of them, but then after she passed and we were going through her things, we found even more that were stuck in her closet that we just kept pulling out and like, I've never seen these before.
Yeah.
Wow.
But she just had a natural God-given talent. She never
Yes.
took any lessons or anything. She was just very artistic.
That's amazing. Are you guys artistic in any way? Was anybody else in the family like that?
No, ma'am.
No. Well, April's a little more musically inclined. She can play the piano and things like that.
Sure.
But as far as like drawing, now our oldest daughter is very, very good at drawing as well. So her and Catie, as a matter of fact, I thought that's what Catie was doing, was watching her older sister Abigail, because Abigail would draw quite often, and we thought, well, she's just watching her and just wanting to kind of get into it. We had no idea she was as talented as she really was.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, her name is Catie, spelled with a C, right?
Yes, her name was actually Catherine. Cody and I like the name, but we actually just saw it on I think it was a TV show, and it was Kathryn. And I said, "Oh, I like that. It's a different spelling." Mm-hmm. But our first oldest 2 daughters are Abigail and Anna. And then, of course, you have me, April. So Cody said, "Well, I like Catherine, but it's got to be with a C." He's like, we're gonna have to divide this equally so I could get some C names out of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we have April, Abigail, and Anna, and then we had Cody, Catie, and our son's name is Cooper. So we had 3 A's and 3 C's.
Perfect. I love that. That's a great story. So you all decided to take a trip together as a family in the late summer of 2020. Talk about that.
It had been quite a while since we had taken a family trip, probably 6 or 7 years. 2020 was just a horrible year for us. I ended up having a back injury, and one of the tests that they were using to diagnose the back injury caused me to have a brain bleed. And so I ended up having to have a craniotomy.
Yeah.
And our trip had already been pushed back a couple of times because of COVID. But, it was already paid for and everything. And then we had the opportunity to go in September. And I had my surgery on June 27th. So we decided to to go ahead and take her trip because everything had just been so stressful. So we ended up going in September, and she actually ended up passing away September 27th. So it was just a few short months afterwards, but we just wanted time off with the family just to be able, just to reconnect and get away from some of the stress.
Yeah.
So we took a trip to Tulum, Mexico. It was a all-inclusive vacation and everything. And April and I, we were actually going to renew our vows while we were down there and everything. And we get down there, and a few days into the trip, Catie, kind of back up. On our way there, we noticed that she had been drinking a lot of water, and the plane ride over there it's only like I think it was only a 2-hour flight, but in those 2 hours she had got up multiple times to use the restroom. And asked her, I was like, are you feeling okay? And she just you'd have to know Catie, everything was fine. She's like, are you okay? She's, I'm fine. And she'd even almost get like insulted if you asked her. That's just kind of how she was. But I was like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. And I was like, well, it's like, you've used the restroom several times. She's like, oh, I've just been drinking a lot of water. I was like, okay. And so just kind of left it at that. But a few days into Mexico, actually it was the day we were supposed to renew our vows. We were just kind of chilling in our rooms for a bit. It was really hot there. The day before we were out fishing, and everybody was just got dehydrated and whatnot. So we decided to spend the day in our rooms. And Anna and Cooper come up, running up. Our room was above theirs. April and I had a suite, and theirs was right below ours. And they came up there, and they just came in and said, Katie's not doing well. And so April and I went down there, and she was vomiting a lot, and she was just a lot of heavy breathing and nausea. She could tell she was kind of in pain, and we called the doctor, the in-house doctor there, and the doctor said, sounds like it's just, how they put it?
Just the food from a different location, just the different spices, things that she wasn't used to.
Yeah, there was a term for it. It was a traveler sickness. That's what she called it.
But she had vomited twice, and the physician told us, well, if she vomits 6 times or more, just call me back and let me know. She said, it's probably just a stomach bug, which the day before, our daughter Anna had a stomach bug. But, I thought everything was fine. Catie had asthma. And about a month before we went on our trip, I took her to her pediatrician to have her checked out. They did some blood work on her. I just wanted to make sure everything was good before we actually went to Mexico. And so she had a tough time the day before when we went deep sea fishing. And she kind of just sat in the cabin, just trying to stay cool, drinking water. And she just seemed like she didn't have a lot of energy. Well, then the next morning, the day we were supposed to renew our vows, I went down the next morning to check on her, and she had ordered room service, and she was eating yogurt and fruit and cereal and watching TV, and said she felt perfectly fine. So didn't think anything of it. And then it was maybe 5 or 6 hours later that they came up and said that she was sick, that she was vomiting.
Yeah.
So that's how everything started.
Yeah. And then late that night, she finally went to sleep, and April and I stayed down there with her, and the kids stayed up in our room. So the next morning, we get up, and I take our son Cooper down to the beach. He wanted to go swimming in the ocean, so he goes out there. It was because we got up early. I was like, okay, let's let him rest. And then shortly after that, April called me out there and said that Catie was unresponsive. She couldn't wake her up. And so we rushed back. And by the time I had got there, the doctor was there. and trying to get her to wake up. So she slipped into a coma. They called the ambulance, got the ambulance there, and the ambulance took her and was taking her to, we thought they were taking her to a hospital, but they ended up taking her to a small, emergency.
Basically like one of our minor emergency.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
walk-in
Here.
clinic kind of thing here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they get her there, which took, how long was that ambulance?
About 45 minutes. 45
It was
minutes.
almost an hour to get to that one. And in the process, they pulled over trying to intubate her, and they couldn't get her intubated. But by the time they get her there, and we're like, okay, what's going on? And they didn't know exactly what was wrong with her. At that point, we knew her blood sugar was still high, and the doctor comes to us and is like, she needs to be in ICU, and we don't have an ICU here, so we need to send her to Cancun. They wanted to send her to a private hospital in Cancun, and they said, but it was going to take, they wanted $18,000 up front just to accept her as a patient. And we're like, we don't have $18,000 to wire transfer to do this.
Oh.
And that's when things really kind of started spiraling out of control for us. The receptionist there was telling us that we needed to pay them, started off at like a little over $2,000. It was like $2,300, something like that. And we're like, okay, well, we'll deal with that once we get situated, where we're going to, take her. We got to figure out something out. And this process was about a couple of hours. And in the process, April had called her older brother, Brian, and told him what was going on. Well, Brian's son-in-law, Brandon, was a part owner of an ambulance company here in Texas. So he was trying to scramble and figure out how they could get her from Mexico back to the U.S. So that kind of started that night while we were trying to get her someplace to get her stable so we could get her to the U.S.
Yeah.
Well, the doctor finally tells us, well, there's a hospital. It's just a mile down the road. And we're like, okay, well, let's get her there. Well, the ambulance company wanted $1,100, $1,100. And we're like staring at him. We're like, okay, well, we'll get you the money. We just let's get Catie figured out first.
Yes.
And they weren't going to take her until we paid them. And then at this point, it had been a little over an hour, and the receptionist at this emergency room said now we owed them like $3,200. It had jumped over $1,000, and I said just a minute ago it was, it was a little over 2,000, and just like, well, it's been longer, needed more medicine and stuff, and it's going to keep going up.
Wow.
So we're trying to get all this, situated, and we finally get the ambulance situated. We got them paid, and April's brother was able to wire transfer the money for that emergency room because we didn't have that kind of cash on us. Then they finally took us to the hospital. Well, they took April and Catie to the hospital. They wouldn't let me onto the ambulance at that point, but I had to get back to the resort for the other, because we had the other children still at the resort. So I had to get back to them.
Yeah.
So April and Catie went to the hospital while I went back to the resort.
Initially, when they picked her up from the resort to take her to the hospital, I was in the back with her, and they had me bagging her back there while they went to work on her. And when they pulled over to try to intubate her, the intubation wasn't in her airway. It went into her esophagus and was just putting air in her stomach. And I kept telling the lady, your airway's in the wrong spot. I was like, look at her stomach. You can see her stomach is extended. And so when she pulled it out just from all the pressure, everything, the abdominal acid, everything was coming out, and she ended up aspirating some of the acid and it went into her lungs. But the whole time we were at the hospital, and while we were trying to get her transferred out, I was on the phone with the insurance company, and they were talking to the staff there, and they were saying, we're going to pay it. It's covered. It's paid for. But the hospital wouldn't accept that the insurance said they would pay for it. They just wanted their cash up front.
Wow.
So, but when we transferred to the main hospital about a mile down the road, it was almost like it was a compound. There were guards standing everywhere with machine guns. Once you walked into the emergency room door, they locked it behind you. It was just, everything was filthy. It was just blood on the walls, on the floors. It was a nightmare. But they had her there, and they had her stabilized at first. She had been there for a couple of hours, and then she coded. So I ended up, all total, watching them perform CPR on her 7 times. And just the worry, and that Cody couldn't be there. And so I'm texting him, trying to update him and trying to keep our family updated. And thank goodness there was the pediatrician that was there that was taking care of her. She was so very nice. She was so kind. She didn't speak a lot of English, but I told her that someone was coming from the company Medical Jets to transport her back to the United States. And so she was letting me take pictures of all the medications they were giving her, of all the labs that they had taken, so that they could be prepared and make sure that they had everything they needed. But at one point, when we were sitting in the waiting room, a nurse walked up to Cody and handed him a vial of blood and said, I need you to take this to the lab 8 miles down the road.
Golly.
And Cody looked at me and he said, what do I do with this? I said, don't worry about it. I'm like, we're getting out of here.
Yeah.
I said, it doesn't matter what that lab result says anyway.
Yeah,
And,
that was the next morning.
It was for a toxicology test. But,
yeah, that was the next morning. I was able to get over there after that long night. And April had been talking to Brian and Brandon, and Brandon was telling us that he had a whole list of people that he was trying to get a hold of a jet, and he called everybody on the list, and nobody had a jet except for he got to the last person on the list was Jeremy Thomas.
which he's the owner of Medical Jets.
Correct.
And he had flown to other countries before and helped bring people home. And so Jeremy told him, he said, I'll do it. And it was going to take $50,000 just to get the jet fueled and loaded up and off the ground. And Jeremy said, don't worry about the money. He said, let's just go get her.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out once we get back.
Yeah.
So we were very blessed in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they took in, because Jeremy told me, he said, he's like, I can get a hold of a jet. He goes, but I don't have a crew as far as nurses. He didn't have nurses. He had a jet and a pilot, and but he didn't have any nurses because it was still the height of the COVID situation, and all of his EMTs and nurses were busy shuffling people around the United States, going from overloaded hospitals to take them to hospitals that could actually take them in. And so, but once he heard what was going on, he was like, yeah, let's go. And Brandon's like, well, so both of them were flight nurses. They started off as flight nurses, both of them. And Brandon's like, man, I haven't done this in years, but
He started out in ICU and then became flight nurses.
Yeah.
So they had all the experience that
Sure.
they needed.
Yeah.
And it worked out just perfectly. There was one doctor who didn't want to release her because she said she was too sick. And that doctor went off shift, and another doctor came on right as they were landing. So I told that doctor, I said, there is a medical jet here to take her back to the United States. And she said, she's very sick. She needs a lot of medicine. And I've said, they've got it. They've got it covered. They do this all the time. And so they just started printing out our records and getting everything ready. And we couldn't find a hospital over here to accept her. And so my sister-in-law was the CEO of the Christus Hospital in Longview. Mm-hmm. So she got one of her ER doctors to accept her as a patient. Because at first our flight plan said San Antonio. And so after we finally had paid them all the cash that they wanted, and we finally got in the ambulance and got out to the airfield, the guy said, "Oh, you've got a flight plan here that says that you're going to Dallas." He said, "Well, the one that you filed said you're going to San Antonio." And he said, I've got to go talk to him at the tower about this. And the pilot said, get in the plane, hurry, just get in the plane. So we loaded up real quick, barely had time to shut the doors, and we just took off. So my thought was just like, Lord, please don't let us be shot down after all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and that was April. I obviously, with the kids and everything, I couldn't go with them. So when they landed, they got in from the time Brandon and Jeremy landed to the time they took off. They were basically patting palms. Like I said, Jeremy's done this before. So he brought just a bunch of cash. And from they landed, they had to pay to get through customs. They had to pay security to get into the hospital. They blocked the ambulance, and by the time they got Catie and everything, April was trying to go out. They wouldn't let April leave until they paid, and finally got to the ambulance, had to pay security again, back to the airport. It was, everything was just, they needed cash. We had to ultimately just kidnap her to get her back to the United States. But the thing is once they got in the air, they called Children's in Dallas and told them, we have this patient, we have to land. And
they were saying they had to make an emergency landing.
Yeah. And at that point, they have to treat it like a 911 call. They have to accept her at that point.
Yeah.
And when they landed, Jeremy had his ambulances there at the airport, and they got her to Children's in Dallas. And they were there all that night. And I was still in Mexico with the kids. There was a big gap from when April left, and she texted me, we're about to take off. So I knew I wasn't going to hear from her for a while. And she texted me when they finally landed and everything, letting us know that, they got there okay. Well, then the next morning, really didn't hear much from her. I texted her a few times. Then her brother called me, and I said, well, how's she doing? How's she doing? You get this, it's not good, but the whole time you're thinking, okay, she's in the United States now. She's going to be fine. As long as she's, gets back to the United States, everything will be better. They can help her. But Brian finally calls me, and I said, so how's she doing? And he said, she's stable. That's literally all he said.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, April had called and said, she's stable and everything. And when we get back, at this point, it was a couple of hours till our flight back. We just went commercial to get back. And she's like, when we get back, then, we'll meet and the doctor will talk to us.
I knew she wasn't doing good. I knew the prognosis wasn't good. But I didn't want Cody to be in Mexico with the kids and worried about trying to get back and trying to get back through customs and worrying about Catie at the same time. So I just told him, I was like, the neurologist will meet with us. He said, no matter what time he gets in, he said, we'll meet and I'll explain everything.
So when we get back, Brian had got a room across from the hospital, and we took the kids there. And April's whole family was over there at that point. And they took the kids as I went over and met April at the hospital and went in there and sat down with the neurologist, and everybody there at Children's in Dallas was amazing. But he sat down with us and basically kind of explained that there was too much pressure on her brain, and her brain had herniated.
Mm-hmm.
And so April and I, we sat there and we're like, okay, we know worst case scenario, but what is the absolute best case scenario? And he told us there's no quality of life.
Mm.
He said, you're looking at your best case scenario.
Yeah.
He said, if you choose to try to keep her alive and not remove life support, he said she will be on life support for the rest of her life.
Yeah. So we had to make the decision to take her off of life support. And that was September 27th, 2020.
And I remember, if I remember this right, April, you stayed and listened to her heartbeat, right?
Yes. Cody told me when children was gracious and let our other children come in and say goodbye to her, even though it was against the rules. And Cody told me, he said, I'm sorry. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And I said, I heard her first heartbeat, and I'm going to be here to hear her last. And so I sat with her while they removed life support until she had passed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My heart just breaks for you guys, knowing all that you went through. It's so hard to imagine that incredible journey that you walked there in Mexico, and the hope that you had as she was brought back to the United States, and then for her to go home in that way. It's just heartbreaking. The guys that helped you were such heroes. I can't imagine the courage that it took to do what they did, and then the money and the time and all of those things. And I'm sure they were devastated as well by Catie's passing.
And it was very hard, was also, we had to tell our other children what was going on and that she wasn't going to make it. So that was a very hard time. But
Brandon and Jeremy are absolute, they're heroes I mean, they knew how dangerous it was, and they didn't think twice. And there was no question about it. And the thing is, so Brandon had never done anything like this, and he told us afterwards. He was like, Jeremy pulled him aside and was like, no amount of training is going to prepare you for what you're about to go through and see.
Wow.
And he was like, he was kind of like, okay. And sure enough,
Jeremy told him, he said, when you walk in there, he said, you're boss.
Yes.
He said, you tell them what to do. You don't let them try to railroad you and tell you what to do. He said, you tell them what you need. You get what you want. And he said, there's no questions asked. And so that's
he said, you do not take no for an answer.
That's exactly what they did.
They came in and they ordered those guys around. It was impressive. They went in there and totally emptied 2 crash carts, just took whatever they wanted. And when they got onto the jet, that pilot was on point, because as soon as that guy left, the pilot was just like, hold on. And is like, as long as we get in the air, we're good. And the whole team was just incredible. Those guys are just incredible.
Nobody was strapped in but Catie. We just literally shut the door, held onto the walls and the oxygen tank, and just took off. But Brandon is married to my niece, and he is a wonderful, wonderful, caring person. And honestly, we could not have asked for anyone better to come and bring her home.
This concludes the first half of my conversation with Catie's parents, Cody and April Quillen. Be sure to come back next week to hear how God has carried them through the past what-ifs by focusing on the future what-ifs. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.